Hey everyone, I'm Tammy Salenberger, the author of The One Inside 30 Days to Your Authentic Self. This podcast is for anyone curious about who they are, the different parts of themselves, and for those who want to connect with their true self. Welcome. I'm so glad you're here.
Hey, I am super excited to have back on the podcast my best buddy, Joan Ryan. And welcome, Joan.
Hey, Tam, partner in crime, right?
I know. We just make up reasons to get together. And
Yes, we do.
what we were talking about is we wanted to talk about New Year's resolutions because we all make them. And we know that our New Year's resolutions are often generated from parts. And Joan and I talk about the Enneagram, and you know this because if you listen to the podcast, you know that we talk about the Enneagram all the time, and we've done workshops and classes on the Enneagram. So we know that our major players and our parts are connected to our type. So the major players in my parts, I'm going to find them and know them if I know my Enneagram type. And so that's one of the reasons why I love the Enneagram combined with IFS, is because it really is sort of this shortcut to who are my major players. I can look at my Enneagram type and know who my major players are going to be. So it's super fun. So I love New Year's resolutions. If you read my book, I pick a word for the year. I've been thinking about my New Year's resolution, my word for the year over the past month. And so I thought, okay, wait a minute. I already know that all the talk in my head is generated from my 3. I want to do this. I want to change this. I want to fix this. All this doing energy. And I'm like, that's my 3 part. And so I want to think about and talk about with Joan what it looks like, what New Year's resolutions look like when they're generated from parts, which are connected to our Enneagram type, and when they look like when they're generated from self, which is also connected to our type, but it's a little bit softer, a little bit different. So that's what I'm thinking. Joan, what do you want to add to that idea?
No, I love that idea. And I love what you said about our knowledge of Enneagram type giving us some shortcuts, because what you and I have learned over the last however many years we've been doing this, which is just too fun, is that there are parts that have to be in there. If you are a particular type, you're going to have other parts, and we know that. And those are going to be specific to you and your life experience and all. But knowing that the parts that are holding the structure of type are there really is, as you said, a shortcut. One of the things that, as you know, Tammy, you and I have been working with in our classes lately is the fact that if those parts begin to relax, it makes room for not only the essence quality of the type to come through, but also for self energy. So for New Year's resolutions, yes, we want to start with what off the top of our head would be the resolution that is generated from parts, mostly protectors. And then what would it look like if we softened that and we made the resolution instead from self, or from a combination of self and essence?
Beautiful. I love it. It reminds me of Seth Copald's book, Selfled.
Right.
And that Seth and I talked a month or so ago, and his podcast will be released next week. And so that idea of like just wanting to be more self-led, and like, what does that look like per type? Because I think there's a different way. Me and my Enneagram 3-ness, me being self-led as a 3 is gonna look a little different than you being self-led as a 9.
Exactly. I'm glad you mentioned Seth. It's so interesting. Seth and I did our very first IFS trainings together in the same group a long time ago.
I did not know that. That's awesome.
We did. We were in I think it was 2010 or 2011. We were in the same cohort, and his work is so consistent with ours. He doesn't do the Enneagram, but the way that he views self and the way that he feels softening is just really beautiful.
I love it.
And I love that. Okay,
Yeah.
so let's go back to, I think, probably using you as an example. So you started to say that if you did your resolutions from your 3, it would essentially, tell me if this is right or wrong, it would essentially look like a task list. Like, what are the accomplishments that I want to achieve this year? And that's very much tied to the type. So if you take a deep breath and you relax that a little bit, what's underneath that? Or what comes up if a little more self energy is allowed to come up through and in?
Well, the first thought I had, thank you for leading me in that. It's really beautiful. The first thing I had was sort of the softening is like, I want to practice more being, practice more being and less doing. And then I kind of heard, what would it be like? What would it be like for my task list to look more like uh tasks for being, like more
I
centering
love
prayer
that.
sits,
I
like
love that. Yeah. 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 As you and I were talking before we started to record, I made some notes um, that we can use to get to this. And one of the things that I was looking for is if I suggested something that you could practice during the year, like to make a New Year's resolution, I'm going to practice this. And actually, what I wrote for 3 was, can I find something each day that I can do that has no product and no result, that I can do just to do it?
mm.
Like that. Does that ring with your understanding of 3?
Yeah, and I think that because it's funny kind of think about that. I think, okay, well, even when I do my relaxing things, if I do a puzzle, or even if I do like a centering prayer, a sit, which is like a meditation, usually there is an agenda there, right? There's to finish the puzzle
Oh,
or to relax or
yeah, it's
yeah.
going to sneak in. I say it gets really sneaky the more you learn to be able to recognize it. It just gets subtle, I guess is a better word than sneaky.
So it just came
So
up for
what if
me.
you drop that and you go one level below that?
Yeah, with that feels like is doing it for its own sake, the process sake. Like, so I do a sit just for the sake of doing a sit. And I do the puzzle just for that, like the feelings that come up with it still has it has a loose agenda with it, but it feels a little bit better.
And that's really beautiful, Tammy, because what you just talked about was medicine for 3. To allow yourself to become more comfortable with your feelings, because we know that you're an emotional type. We know that you're emotion led, even though it doesn't look like it on the outside. And so practicing that and kind of desensitizing the protectors that are afraid of those feelings a little at a time would be a fabulous New Year's resolution.
I love
I really
that. I like that. And I
like
like
that.
that's one of the things I'm going to back you up about the practice. That's one of the reasons why I love picking a word, because that word, like this year of 2023, my word was love.
Mhm.
And that changed, like what that looked like and what that meant for me changed through the year. Like, and what it looked for me, like on the inside with my parts, on the outside with my partner and with my friends and with my son, all it changes. It changes through the year. So I loved that as a practice is thinking about.
Well, and it changes as you free more and more self energy.
Yeah, that makes
As
sense.
you free more, and again, to go back to my Enneagram language, the more you soften the way the type controls you,
That's
and
good.
you
Yeah,
have more choice over it, it is going to change, of
that's
course.
good.
Okay, so
Let's do two and then four. So let's do the
okay,
hearts types.
okay, and that makes sense because 2 and 4 are going to be connected to 3. They're both obviously emotional types. So if I look at 2, my guess is that most 2s, if we ask them for a New Year's resolution and it came from their parts or their protectors, their type related protectors, would come up with something that had to do with helping or with giving to other people. Key here is the focus on the benefit being to others, not to themselves. And that's just going to be natural. It's really hard if you're to soften this because everybody around you loves it because they're
Yeah.
getting the benefit, you know?
I was thinking about this with my mom, Joan, because my mom's a two, and my mom is a giver and a helper. And I was thinking, what would her New Year's resolution be? And I think that her resolution would be try to do less, try to help less,
That's
like
right.
try to stop giving so many people meals and rides and la 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 la, la, try to set up boundaries. Um, but I don't think that would work. Like I think that as a resolution is still sort of parts led. It's almost kind of like a polarizing part that's like help less, like try to help
Exactly.
less. But I don't think that would work. I don't think it would work though.
And what you're pointing out is really, really good because what you're saying is it's still being controlled by the protector because it's still keeping the focus out on other. And what we want to do, the same way as you just talked about in year 3, is we want to encourage a New Year's resolution that creates a little more balance so that the focus comes back to themselves, distinct from self, but the focus comes self-reference rather than that aggressively other reference that the type controls. So, and what I wrote for this one is that a practice might be to find one thing each day that I can do just for myself.
Yeah, that's really good.
Preferably where nobody notices, but it's just for me.
And then you don't tell anybody.
And then you don't tell anybody, and that's also important. One of the things we have traditionally suggested for twos as medicine for the type, this Helen Palmer's words, is that they find places to give or be helpful where there's no acknowledgement or where nobody knows that they did it. But that's still other referenced and other directed. So to really go to making more and more space for self, I think it has to come back to a balance.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And I just the idea of the polarization, I think is so true, right? Because I can have right the part like that. Let's say the helper part is the one driving the two, and then you can have a polarized part that's like I'm not going to help anybody and da, da, da. But again, I love what you're saying is that still other reference. It's still and it's a polarization. It's still
Right.
being driven by a part that's just responding, just like my part. It's like okay, we're going to stop doing, we're going to focus on being. It's still a part.
But it's still polarized. And
Yeah.
thank you for bringing our focus back to that polarization. Because what I'm aware of, one of the big things that I think you and I have been working with, especially the last 6 months or so, is the fact that these polarizations are so present. And anytime we find a part, especially a part that's connected to type, we're going to find a polarized part in the other side.
Yeah. Good.
Again,
Uh,
a really good reference point.
All right. So what about our love, it's so our fours?
Our
Um,
romantic fours.
our
Okay.
romantic fours. It's funny, you said romantic, and I wrote in my little list, I wrote routine and structure, that they need more routine and structure and
Well, yeah,
consistency.
and I think so. Where I went with it is the idea that if they were going to allow the type related protectors to state the New Year's resolution, it would be something about distinguishing themselves because they, making themselves more and more unique and special. And actually, if you really dig down in that, that gets in the way of self energy
Yeah.
because that unique and special focus, while it is it's inner focused, is not in the present moment. And
Yeah.
that's the key piece here. We've got this in two places. We've got this with 4, and again, when we get to 7, where the focus is habitually and kind of strongly not in the present moment. In the case of 4, it tends to be in the past because it tends to be in idealizations that are formed around memories or experiences from the past. So when I see that kind of a polarization, where I want to go with it is to practicing being in the present moment. So again, traditionally for 4, we would say the medicine is to appreciate or accept something that's common and simple and, not special at all.
Right.
But I want to extend that a little bit and say, can we find one thing that's perfect just as it is in the present moment? No past, no future.
That's
Just
beautiful.
in the present moment. And that's going to be really hard to practice. But I think that keeping in mind that the essence quality for 4 is equanimity, that's a way to learn some balance.
Yeah, I think that's what I was thinking about the routine and structure, because I think that sounds boring and ordinary.
That's
And
right.
yet it's like it almost feels like the being more grounded is actually exactly what they need. Like
That's
that
exactly
kind of,
right.
but I think
Yeah.
that's what you're saying is being present. So being present, grounded.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I love that. It's good.
And appreciating that's also wonderful
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
as something idealized from the past.
Yeah. I
Absolutely.
love that. All right. So let's talk about 5, 6, and 7s.
Okay, so I like to start with the center point. So let's go to 6, or
Perfect.
loyal skeptics, or the older name devil's advocate, which I still really love. So here, I think if we let the parts create the New Year's resolution, what might happen is something like I'll challenge myself against my fear, or I'll recognize my fear and do it anyway, or something like that. And I think I've seen that in some of the 6s in my life or in the ones that I work with. And again, that's fine, but that's coming from protectors, and there are going to be polarized parts that aren't going to want to do that.
What I'm
Which,
thinking, they're going to run over the parts that are afraid, or it's sort of like, well, I'm going to be more courageous, right? I'm just going to be more courageous. And they're
that's right.
really going to bypass the parts that actually hold fear. And so we don't want to do that either. So we have sort of parts that are polarized, but then we don't want to ignore the parts that have fear, have concerns.
Right.
Yeah. So,
Well, and so again, I'm stepping one or two steps beyond that and thinking about how that fear and that focus on what can go wrong creates kind of a negative cast to everything and a
mm-hmm.
negative view. So my suggestion for our 6s, and each one is going to have to decide, is to focus more on what goes right. And you know how much I love the idea of balancing. So instead of all that negative focus, can we begin to bring awareness to positive and start to bring that into balance? What I wrote was listing the wins and positive outcomes in an average day.
That's good. I love that. Well, and I think that also doing that does the other thing for 6s, which is that it gives them a way to feel secure. Like
Right.
if I'm aware of the positive wins every day, that brings some security in my system, I think.
It does, and it leaves a lot more room for self energy.
Yeah,
Doubt crowds out self energy.
that's good.
Fear crowds out self energy.
Beautiful.
So we want to make a little more space for that.
That's
Okay,
good.
so if I go
5s.
to 5, what the type normally is going to do, we believe, and borne out by all the interviewing I've been doing all these years, is that the type's gonna land on something like, I'm gonna study a little less, or I'm gonna think that I'm gonna release my need to know how much time and energy something's gonna take. And the more you focus on that, the more the polarization is gonna come up and push against it, which could create, which could negate the positive that you're trying to create there. So I'm looking at the idea of putting some boundaries on things, because it's interesting. Even though 5s are so aware of time and energy, one of the things that will let them let go of that is their study into a particular subject, and that almost insatiable quest for more and more knowledge. So what I came up with was, could they create, and maybe this would be a little artificial at first, an endpoint to information gathering on a particular subject, and then just notice what it feels like to appreciate that that's enough. And the key word here was enough.
Yeah.
Not too much, not too little, but just enough.
Yeah. I love
So
that.
that's my 5.
I was thinking about for 5s, they could also then add in, which I think would probably be really uncomfortable for 5s listening, but add in, what if you then that's enough? And what if the next step is then you share that with somebody else? You share what you learned or sort of reached out to someone else and shared what you're learning with them.
I think that that's exactly right, because the other piece that we know about 5s, and they continue to validate this when we talk to our students, is that they generally don't feel that they're good at connecting to other people. And it isn't really true.
Right.
But
Right.
they've got parts in there that believe it. So what you're talking about is softening that certainty.
Yeah.
And practicing.
Yeah.
So
I love
really
that.
cool.
All right. And what about our fun 7s?
Our
Fun,
fun
fun,
7.
fun.
So I started to talk about this a little bit with 4, and as I was thinking about this, it helped me, because very often we meet 4s or 7s who very strongly resonate with the other type. 7s that resonate with 4s, and 4s that resonate with 7s. And on the face of it, it doesn't make sense, because they're in a lot of ways very opposite. 4s are past focused and 7s are very future focused. But I think that the idea is the same. If they were going to let their type create a New Year's resolution, undoubtedly it would be for the next big adventure, or the next big 3 adventures, or something like that. So what I want to do again is to suggest that they pull it back and balance, and find something, an activity, or it can be something fun. It doesn't matter, but that's fine just as it is. That doesn't need a whole lot of planning. That doesn't need to jump ahead into the future. So I'll use the words you used before. Can they just stay grounded in the present moment and appreciate?
Yeah.
So
I
there
love
it is.
that.
Very similar to 4. It's just the opposite side.
It's so funny, Joan, because I wrote, right, the parts led would have like more fun, more travel, more adventure. And then I thought what they need though is to turn, this is all I could come up with, was turn in and down more
That's
often,
right.
which I think that's exactly what you're saying, sort of turning in and sort of being more grounded, right? If I turn in and down, more connected to my body, I'm out of my head. 7's going to be in their head. So more kind of turning in and down.
It's exactly right.
But have fun.
And it's so funny that you use that phrase, because again, that's a Helen Palmerism.
Oh, really?
And one of the things she's always taught and always led with, is that for everybody, when you get activated, when you get triggered, what you want to do is you want to bring your attention in and down. And she says it exactly that way, in order to get to the neutral space in your body.
That's beautiful.
And
And
there
that's
it is.
that. I think that's self-led too, right? If the more I turn in and
Absolutely.
down, there's more spaciousness, more self.
Yep.
Beautiful. All right. 8, 9s, and 1s.
Oh boy. All
We'll do
right.
our
So
9s.
it's always hardest to do your own. So I'm going to look at my notes, because otherwise the confusion will roll in and I will not be able to do 9. I think that if I let my parts, my type related parts, generate a resolution, oh boy, this really activates me. I can feel it.
What's happening? Can you tell us what's happening right now?
Yeah, what's happening is that I'm not clear. Like, you
Okay.
ask me about 7 and I can come right up. You ask me about 5, I can come right up with an answer. You ask me about 9 and I'll get, oh,
Your 9. Oh, your
what do
9
I want
takes
to say here?
over, right? Your
Yeah,
9 parts
and
take
that's what
over. That
happens.
makes
Yeah,
sense.
that's what happens when I have to speak for myself. Okay. When I have to speak And, there's a whole long explanation for why, but that's not relevant right now. It's just that this feeling comes that I don't know what to say, would be the way I put it. So if I was going to set a goal from that place, it would probably look like a 3-part lead goal, because it would have something to do with completing something, or, doing something I'd never done before. But with completion being a big deal. And that makes no sense, because completing things is not a problem for me, but my type parts think it is. So what's a better practice is, and here's that balance thing again, in the 9 and in me as a 9, my attention goes out to whoever or whatever is in the space. It can be another person, it can be a project, it can be my dog. She gets the benefit of this. But what I'm not good at is bringing it back in and keeping my attention on myself. So it's a little bit close to what we were talking about with 2, but it's not about taking care of myself. It's about not being controlled by the energetic of other. So a resolution for 9 that I could come up with is to remember that in order to answer a question or make a decision or take a step forward, I really have to disconnect from the energy of others or of other situations in order to feel my own priority.
Yeah,
And that's going to be the hardest place. But again, that takes me back to self.
Yeah, someone had mentioned in one of our workshops something about having some like disengaging and having time alone was a way to get more connected to self, and then they can kind of re-engage. And I find that as a 3 I go to 9, in a lot of my relationships, and I'm like, that's so true for me, that sometimes I can't even think straight. I sort of, everyone else's emotions feel super too big. And then if I can just because think about going into the holidays, sort of being around people 24/7, I know that I'm just going to have to, in order for me to connect to myself, I'm going to have to remove myself. What happened for you, Joan, right then? Just sort of, you had this part come in, blend, there's some confusion.
Well, I know, and I can practice to reassure that protector. No, I do know the answer here. It's okay. The answer will come. And I don't actually even do it consciously anymore, or, like specifically. But what I'm really leaning on is the knowledge that this confusion is just a screen. And not true.
Yeah.
I was working with a 9 client a week or so ago, and we were working on this same thing, that if you're a 9 and you can remember that the opinion or the answer or the priority is actually in there and just covered over, it makes it a lot easier to begin to find it.
I love that. It's like that confusion or dissociation or numbness or disconnect, like all those parts, I think, that are so hard to work with. Remembering that they're actually, not to dishonor them, but they're actually sort of pretty thin veils usually, and we're still there. And there's a thin veil, and they're trying to help us. And so whatever that is, whether it's a wall or whatever that looks like, because we all have them, and they're all called something different, but that wall or numb or disconnect or confusion.
I think that's right, Tammy. And I think the idea that it is relatively thin, many 9s will, and I think I've done this, will say that what it feels like is like the fog rolls in. And if you think about fog doesn't have any substance.
Right.
It's really light and thin, but when you're in it, it feels all encompassing.
And you can't see. You literally can't see, right? The fog is there. You can drive through it, right? But yeah, that's beautiful. I love that.
That's really cool. Okay, moving right along. So if I go to, I'm going to go to 1 first, because we usually go to 8 and the 1s get mad. So let's go to 1 first. And where I landed there is on the recognition that the focus pattern for the protectors in a 1 are on detail. And so the out of balance, and we're back to that balancing, the out of balance in a 1 is between detail and overview. And if we let the type create the New Year's resolution, it's going to be some form of improvement, and it's going to be in a detailed, planned way, most likely.
I was thinking of the word fixing. I was thinking of
Exactly.
fixing. Yeah, good.
Improvement, fix, all of those words, exactly. So where I would suggest they could go, if it was a more self-led resolution, would be, this is trite, but it's appropriate to see the forest and not just the trees. To really begin, and with any of these things, you have to do it in small steps to begin to back up. So instead of 1 tree, you see 3 trees, and instead of 3 trees, you see 6 trees, and then slowly you begin, because they do have wonderful overview. They're gut types, instinctual types at heart, and that gets covered over by all of this detail and all of this thinking.
Yeah, so I'm thinking of the word spacious, right? So more spaciousness, more perspective, and then that opens up room for more self-led.
Perfect.
And then we don't have the I'm using my hands, like sort of the narrow view limitation, right? Narrow view limitation of just seeing through a part. We know that, but so that's going to be that's maybe more true for the 1.
That's right. So very cool. All right. Last but certainly not least, if we look at the key characteristics of 8 and the parts that are going to push it, we're going to get that it's usually very fast and usually a ton of energy that just rises and moves and keeps moving and doesn't slow down, and just keeps going. And so where I want to go here, again, an incremental suggestion, incremental change suggestion, is to learn to create a little pause before the words come out, before the action and the step forward happens, before the whatever. Because one of the things I know about 8s, and I have over the years worked with many of them, is that one of the barriers to growth for them is to be able to catch that rise of energy is coming. And the ones that can catch it and can learn, in Helen's language, the cues and signs that 8 energy is about to erupt, have a much better chance of making different choices. So my resolution suggestion for 8 is take 1 breath before you speak. Take 1 breath before you take a step forward, at a run with full power. And that's see what
great. Yeah, I was thinking about the idea of sort of the running over. I was thinking about 8s running over people, and the idea of like the same thing is sort of the listening. I was thinking like, what is a way to kind of helping them like lean in, but lean in silence, like leaning in silence, and taking a breath so that there's more listening.
Well, and let's use what you said before, because it really fits here. Take a breath and go in and down. And as I say that, I remember a dear friend of mine in Maine, who's an 8, who had a little reminder on her phone that said in and down. And that's how she began to desensitize. And all she had to do was look at it, and it was right there on her,
I love it.
Screen.
I love that. In and down. I think that might be all of our New Year's resolutions, in and down.
It might be. It might be.
Joan, this is great. So I would highly recommend people just sort of consider what stood out to them about their parts or their type as they listened in, what stood out, what did they have a reaction to, what did they have a reaction against, what made them mad, and just be curious about all of that. And Joan and I have an intro class. So if this was a fun conversation, you want to learn more, we are doing an intro class. Is it 5 classes? I think it's 5
classes starting on Friday, January, I believe it's the 19th. It's going to be 1 to 3 Eastern time in the afternoon. It's not consecutive weeks. It's five classes spread out over a number of weeks. And we would love to have you join us. This is a class that we've run a number of times, and each time is even more fun and even more learning for us. The other thing that we are working on developing, Tammy, you can talk to this better than I can, is more of a process group for our more advanced students. And we define advanced as somebody who has a really strong idea of what their Enneagram type might be, and also is familiar with all of the basics of IFS protocols. So that would be for our process group, which is going to be more of a group than it is a class, right?
Yes. Yeah. So my idea and our idea about this is I've been thinking about running an IFS group and sort of not sure what I want that to look like. So I thought I would start with Joan and with talking about the Enneagram. And the idea would be we would all get to know our parts. And so there might be role plays, there might be lots of experiential stuff. It will be speaking for parts. There might be some embodying parts really to get to know them, but all the parts we're getting to know are the parts that are connected to our type, because those are our major players. That's where we're going to find our exiles. And so that's sort of why we want you to have Enneagram knowledge and want know a little bit about IFS, enough to be able to do the work. So that's kind of the idea, is that we'll be we'll be speaking for parts and unblending and all those parts connected to Enneagram. So we haven't totally figured it out, but I think it's going to be fun. And yeah.
And Tammy, as you say that, what occurs to me is that it's very much as you know, I'm narrative tradition Enneagram trained. And what that means is that the individuals speaking for themselves and for their parts are the experts. So this will be less of a class, although we'll, put in some insights, and more of an internal practice. So if there's a 1 in the group and they're working with their parts, they're teaching me about 1 by doing that.
Well, right. And the other thing is that I'll you have IFS training too, but the idea that we'll probably do this a little bit heavier in this type of group is I'm there and you're there to help really lead people to go inside, to connect to their parts with compassion. So, our introduction Enneagram groups are more, they're Enneagram heavy and they're more teaching, but there is experiential stuff there too, but there's more teaching stuff. So you get to learn a lot and do some experiential stuff. This might be more IFS process, more going inside, a little bit more connecting. Right. I think that's the flavor of it. So
that's exactly the idea. And so anybody that wants to come into these groups really would need to know that they're going to be the active agents, that we will guide and we will hold the structure and the Enneagram the IFS protocols, excuse me, but that they're really going to be doing the work.
Yeah. So if you want to know about either one of those things, you can reach out to Joan and I. Our websites are on the show notes, and probably know where to find us on social media and all the things, or shoot us an email and we'll answer questions. And Joan, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Tam.
Thanks for hanging out with us today. If you like this episode, please subscribe, rate, like, all the things. My book is available at your favorite independent bookstore or all the places books are available. You can also visit my website, tammysallenberger.com, where you can download a free meditation on getting to know your should parts. There's parts of you who remind you of what you should be doing. They sound a bit critical at times. Yes, we all have them. You can follow me at IFS Tammy on Instagram and Twitter, and the One Inside Facebook page. I'm so grateful for Jack Reardon, who created the new music. Jack is a graduate of Derek Scott's IFS Stepping Stone program. Thanks, Jack, for getting me. And to you, thanks for listening.